LDWMMAC, LDMMAC. This is your boy, the Coach, and you're live on the Coach Show, live. Okay, guys, I'm going to make this video basically about the pros and cons of the UFC and Bellator. Folks, this has been, an ongoing discussion. It's been an ongoing discussion by people people that make videos, by fighters. I've done a lot of research and I've done my homework. And, this is what, I'm coming up with. First of all, let's talk about the pros, okay? Let's talk about the pros and cons when it comes to pay, okay? All right. The UFC, hands down, they're going to pay you more than anybody else. And, for a person to leave the UFC to go to another organization, number one, the pay is going to have to be, close or comparable, or they can't tolerate what's going on in the UFC. Then you've had fighters to leave the UFC. The UFC, they're going to pay you more than anybody. Even if you are a non-ranked fighter, okay, you're still going to make more than even a Bellator number 10 ranked fighter. There's no comparison when it comes to pay in the UFC. It's just not. Bellator, the pay in Bellator is a con. That's definitely a con. You have to be within the top 3 to even make some real income, to make like income to where you can actually do it full time. In the UFC, you can be in the top 10 and make enough money to actually fight full time. Okay, you can. In Bellator, if you're the number 10th ranked opponent or a 10th ranked fighter in your division, you got to have another job to pay your bills. Okay, this is what I've seen. And, and people will say, man, yeah, but there might be some stuff behind the scenes. Well, I've interviewed a lot of Bellator fighters, and, a lot of them that are not in the top 3 or ranked very high, they do have to have other jobs to make ends meet. A lot of the UFC fighters, their contract pay or what they get, it's enough. And that's going to lead me into that's going to lead me into the next pro and con. Okay, let's talk about like frequency of fights. Okay, a pro in the UFC, okay, is that if you want to fight, they got fights for you. Okay, if you want to fight, they're going to pretty much give you a fight. In Bellator, if you're a female, and especially the females, you're lucky if you can fight twice a year. Okay, you lucky if you fight twice a year. I mean, we saw Julia Budd fight twice, this year. She fought Chris Cyborg, but, again, Julia Budd is in that top 3. Okay, so Julia Budd is going to be able to find a fight more so in Bellator than, say, somebody not in the top 3. I mean, you got Janae Harding. How long was Janae Harding out at Bellator? And now she finally getting a fight? She finally got a fight that's coming to her? And you got a lot of other fighters on that roster. Hell, you ain't seen them in 3 years, like Gabrielle Holloway. Where's she been for 3 years? I mean, for 3 years, she ain't had a fight? Like, what, man, what's the deal? Bellator, for some reason, man, they don't take care of the fighters the way, they tend not to take care of the fighters when it comes to frequency. And people will talk a lot of noise about the UFC. Well, the UFC does this, but I'm going to tell you, they will have you working. I mean, look at Hannah Cifers. Y'all see how many fights Hannah Cifers done had in the year 2020? If you want to fight, they're going to put you on a card. They don't care if you fight 5 times, in a month. UFC don't care. They just want to they want to fill them cards so they can keep the fans happy. Okay, that's it. So in the UFC, if you're a fighter, especially if you're a female fighter, there are fights for you. In Bellator, the fights are not that abundant for the females. Okay, let's go into money-making opportunities. Okay, let's go into that. A con in the UFC, to me, is the fact that they can't have their own sponsors. Okay, fighters in the UFC, they can't have their own sponsors. They have to, deal with the Reebok money. And, every fighter might not be eligible, to get any Reebok money, whether they win or lose. In Bellator, it's different. You can have your sponsors. You can have people that pay you. You can wear your sponsors on your uniforms. And whether you win or lose, okay, those sponsors still have to pay. And there are quite a few fighters in Bellator that they don't make a whole lot of money from fighting, but they do make quite a bit of money from sponsorships. Now, every fighter that's got a sponsor, they're not making a bag, okay? But you do have some fighters that do have sponsors that pay them well to put those sponsors on their uniform. And the UFC, they used to do that. And some of the fighters, I've heard them complain that, they're losing out on money because they can't put these sponsors on their uniform. Now, isn't it funny, ironic, that the UFC, they say that these fighters can't have sponsors, but then the UFC take all the sponsors and put them in the octagon and hang them up around the arena. Boy, that ought to tell you right now where their priorities at. It's not for the fighters making any excess money, okay? It's just not what it is, okay? It's not for the fighters making excess money. It's the UFC trying to regulate everything that the fighters do, okay? So I'll give that pro to Bellator is that you can have sponsors. You can have as many sponsors as you want, okay? Like Chris Cyborg got a whole lot of sponsors, and those sponsors pay Chris Cyborg well, okay? And it is what it is. So the sponsorship, I definitely go to Bellator. Okay, job stress. And I'll put it out there, it's a lot easier to work at Bellator or to fight for Scott Coker than it is for Dana White. Number one, you don't have somebody really ridiculing you, okay? You don't have somebody saying that your performances suck. I mean, Dana White just come right out and say it, and Dana White get into wars and arguments with fighters, and Dana White will put you on blast, okay? He'll do it, and Dana White don't really care. Scott Coker will take you behind the scenes, okay? He'll take you behind the scenes before he publicly humiliates you. Dana White will humiliate you publicly, and just won't care. And then when you pull up on Dana White, then Dana White will make it seem like that. Oh, he ain't said nothing about you. He ain't said nothing about you negative. But then as soon as he get in front of a camera, Dana White will go in on you. Okay, Scott Coker don't do that. So fighters, they like working, even though they don't make the money. Fighters, I don't know, they tend to be a little bit happier. They tend to be a little bit happier, dealing with Scott Coker. And also, too, let's talk about this, other opportunities, okay? And this is, to me, is a con in the UFC, okay? Bellator, you have the freedom to go work in other organizations. You have that freedom. Some fighters go to Ryzen. Some fighters, they go over to One Championships. I mean, some fighters go to boxing, which Bellator, they're completely open-minded to that stuff. You got some fighters in Bellator that go to kickboxing organizations. You got some people in Bellator that go to Muay Thai organizations. Bellator don't mind fighters even doing extra stuff, like going on reality TV shows. Bellator, they don't mind, fighters doing that kind of stuff. They're pro fighter. The UFC, they're not going to have it, okay? The UFC legit probably not going to have it. They'll have an issue with anything outside of the UFC umbrella, okay? The UFC will have to get their hands on a piece of anything that you try to do. I noticed that Bellator isn't like that. They give the fighters the freedom and flexibility to do what it is they need to do to try to make ends meet, to make extra money. And they don't really bother the fighters when they come to that kind of thing. I noticed that. You got fighters that fight in different, organizations, and then they come back to Bellator. If Scott Coker got a fight for him lined up, Scott Coker, will make the fight happen. If Scott don't have any fights, they don't really care about the fighters going elsewhere to go make money. Okay? That's a pro for me for Bellator. The UFC, you can forget it. They let Conor McGregor do it because Conor McGregor, he's a star. He's the biggest star in the sport. So, yeah, they're going to let him do that. But, if you get like Joe Blow that want to come up and, hey, Dana, I want to take a boxing match. Well, no, he's not going to do that, okay? He's going to be like, no. Okay, a pro and a con. Bellator, they will do business with other promotional companies. They're willing to do that. The UFC, they're not really willing to do business to make fights. The problem with the Bellator versus UFC series, it's not Bellator, it's the UFC, okay? They're not willing to try to make the mega fights happen. And we've seen that before. We've seen it before, over and over and over, where there are fights that we think need to happen. Like, for example, Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes, Ilima McFarlane and Valentina Shevchenko, maybe Denise Kielholtz and Caitlin Chikagian. There are Bellator versus UFC fights that are great matchups, terrific matchups, because Bellator, they do have a strong women's division. It's strong. They may not fight as often, but they're very, very strong. And some of those fights you want to see. And even, maybe even some of the 145-pounders, I mean, it'd probably be nice to see, Megan Anderson go in there and take on Julia Budd, Like, those are fights that we would want to see. But those fights would never happen because the UFC, they won't do any business of that sort with Bellator. It's just not going to happen. Let's see, what else can I think of? Okay, now let's talk about like marketability and exposure to, to just common fans. I give the UFC the check mark in that division. Okay, the UFC, they're exposed more. Bellator, they shot themselves in the ass when they went on DAZN, and that just limited their exposure. It just did. Dana White, they done been on Fox. Now they're on ESPN Plus, and ESPN Plus, they got millions and millions of subscribers. DAZN, they don't have so many subscribers. DAZN DAZN sucks, and so when you go to DAZN, your exposure as a fighter, it decreases. Okay, it decreases. But Dana, they got a lot of exposure. It's the UFC is a household name. People may not even know who the fighters are, but you can better believe that everybody in America and everywhere all over the world, they know who the UFC. If you ask even kids or mainstream fans or fans that don't follow the sport, if you ask them, hey, you know what Bellator is, they're gonna say no. Hey, you know what the UFC is? Yeah, I know what the UFC is. They know, and then they'll say MMA. You can walk along the street and say, hey, what's Bellator? They're going to look at you and be like, Bellator, what's that? So the fighters at Bellator, they don't have a lot of opportunity to be exposed. They just don't, okay? And and that's also another reason, if you add it all together, that's another reason why the fighters can't get paid like they need to get paid. It's exposure. If you have a product that people can't see, then it's a problem. Seriously. If you have a product that people can't even see, then you have an issue with that. And so when people are not buying your product, or people not buying your pay-per-views, or in this case, when they were on DAZN, people not buying the streaming service, well, you can't pay your fighters that much. Now, Bellator, they're taking a step in the right direction. We're going with CBS and Showtime, okay? And this is a move that's going to be more fighter friendly. They'll be able to pay the fighters more. And, you guys know the routine. Okay? That's it. Let me see. What else? Okay, commentary. I think the Bellator commentary, is better than the UFC commentary. I think the only person I don't like in the Bellator commentary is Big Dumb McCarthy. I think he's the worst commentator on God's green earth. But the rest of the commentators at Bellator, they're very fair. They call the fight the way you're supposed to call it. In the UFC, hell, you know who they're going for within the first minute of the fight. They pretty much telling you who they want to win. Okay, they do. And some of the commentary is horrific. Now, I tell you, I think Dominic Cruz is a good commentator. And I think, whenever he's calling the fight, it's good because Dominic Cruz is fair. I think that Dominic Cruz and I think Paul Felder. I think Paul Felder most of the time does a good job, and I think those are my two. Those are my really two who I think call the fight the best. I think the rest of them, my goodness. I think DC. Okay, DC can be biased sometimes. He can be biased, especially when it comes to wrestlers. DC can be hella biased. So, sometimes listening to DC, you kind of have to, hold your breath sometimes. Let me see. But Bellator, I think the commentators over there, they do a better job of talking about what the fighters do well, both sides. They do that. The UFC, they don't really do that. Let me see. Okay. We can't really say judges and referees because the judges and referees, they go to every organization, or just about. Let me see. I'm trying to think. See, guys, I'm doing this video on the fly. Tell the haters they can't do that. Trying to think. What else? Oh, shoot. I think that's about all I can think of. I'll try to come up with some more stuff. This is the stuff that just crossed my mental Rolodex as I was just, driving. All right, guys. Let me know what you think.